Dimitri Lascaris, who's coming to us again from Oslo, Norway. He is on one of the boats as part of the Freedom Flotilla 2023. Of course, Israel has been overseeing a brutal blockade of Gaza now for more than 15 years. And Canada has been totally complicit, of course. We got, Canada voted against a whole bunch of UN resolutions criticizing the blockade. Canada was right at the start where Hamas, part of it, the blockade comes out of Hamas winning the legislative elections and the Palestinian civil war that the US and Canada and others kind of stoked, and then is justified when Hamas took control of Gaza. That's the blockade is being partly justified on those grounds, which was something that's really a response to the Israeli, Canadian, US policy. And of course, it's also always so important to remember that people in Gaza, the Palestinians in Gaza, about two-thirds of them were ethnically cleansed in 1947-48, and Canada played a very important role, the UN, in basically enabling the ethnic cleansing of 1947-48. So I thought I'd have Dimitri on to discuss. I have to say myself, I don't know much about what's been going on with the Freedom Flotillas in past years. I paid more attention. So first of all, thanks, Dimitri, for taking some time I know it's late where you are to join us. But yeah, just tell us about the Freedom Flotilla and what you've been up to, and where it's going and all that kind of stuff.
Thanks for having me again. Pleasure to be here. And by the way, I understand you were roughed up recently by some RCMP goons because you had the temerity to question or attempt to question Melanie Joly about our government support for the proxy war in Ukraine. And I just want you to know that from the other side of the pond, I send you solidarity and keep up the great work. The Freedom Flotilla, this is before I became involved, began back in 2010, I believe it was. That was the first voyage. And that was the most infamous one because the Israeli forces boarded a number of vessels, one of which, the largest, the Mavi Marmara, had a number of Turkish nationals as passengers, and 10 of them were killed, one of them a dual citizen of Turkey and the United States. And this created a huge international uproar. And then there were 5 subsequent flotillas organized sort of irregularly over the intervening years, including the women's boat to Gaza in 2016, the 2018 flotilla in which I participated, but my participation was had to be aborted because of a medical emergency, and then there was a break because of the pandemic, and this year the flotilla was revived. This year, I don't think they've done this in prior years. The voyage has been divided up over 2 years, and so the first leg the first segment of the flotilla ended today in Oslo. The boat is going to be put in winter storage, I understand, in a few days' time, and then it will be resumed next summer. And there's a debate going on, as I understand it right now. I'm not personally involved in that debate about whether they will actually attempt to break the blockade, because the government in Israel has become so lunatic that there is heightened concern about, its willingness to use lethal force to stop peaceful human rights activists from breaking the blockade. So I departed yesterday from Gothenburg, Sweden, on a boat with 11 other passengers, captained by a young Swedish man who himself was, his name is Joel. He was apprehended in the 2012 flotilla, beaten up, spent, I think, 10 days in an Israeli jail, and was deported from the country, even though he himself never made any attempt to enter the country. He was forced to enter the country. People might ask, why do the people of the Freedom Flotilla keep coming back? Why do they persist? Despite the fact that every single time the Israeli forces use brutal force engage in acts of piracy in international waters, confiscate the personal possessions of these people, force them into Israel, and then deport them, and also confiscate the boat, forcing the organizers to raise funds to purchase another boat. Why do we do that? Well, we do that because there are somewhere in the range of 1 million children in Gaza living in conditions that no parent would ever want to see their child have to sustain. And they've been living in these conditions for their entire lives. They're living in destitution, many of them in rubble. A great many of them have close family members, friends, parents who have been killed or wounded by the apartheid military. They are suffering extraordinary degrees of trauma. Every now and again, the Israeli forces mow the lawn, killing dozens, or in some cases in 2014, I believe it was upwards of 500 Palestinian children. This is a matter of conscience, and every single person, and there have been people from all over the world who participated in the Freedom Flotilla. We will persist until these atrocities are brought to an end. And we will draw the eyes of the world upon the suffering of the Palestinian people, and also upon the indomitable will, the truly awe-inspiring determination of the Palestinian people to have freedom and dignity until they have their freedom and their dignity. That's why we keep coming back, and we won't stop. And I think it's time, the last thing I want to say about this, Yves, it took a long time for the international human rights community, really the Western human rights community, to muster the courage to admit what we all knew in our hearts to be true, that Israel was committing the crime of apartheid. Well, let's call what's happening in Gaza by its true name. It's a genocide. And by any rational measure, it is a genocide. It's happening at a relatively low level because the Israeli apartheid regime has mastered the art of committing atrocities just below the level of Western tolerance, Western public tolerance of its atrocities. But it is, as Ilan Pappé, the Israeli human rights activist and scholar, has said, an incremental genocide. And we should call it that, notwithstanding the fact that we will be denounced for being honest about it. And sooner or later, the international human rights community, particularly organizations like Amnesty and Human Rights Watch, will be compelled to admit that that's what it is. But until then, we must speak the truth. And we have an obligation to intervene in any way that we can, because our governments are deeply complicit in this crime against humanity.
Has it been able to generate some media attention in Europe or in Middle East or Palestinian kind of?
Not as far as I could tell, but no. I haven't been following. I spoke to a journalist today who's from Sweden. She was on the vessel with me. She was there in her capacity as a human rights activist, not as a journalist. And she showed me, as we were on the boat, various articles that she's written, and she's managed to get published in the Scandinavian press with tremendous effort over the years. And in the middle of our conversation, she just broke down and started crying. And after she calmed down, she explained to me, she said, "I'm very sorry, but I just got off the phone with the major left-wing newspaper in Norway, and I told them that I had photographs of our voyage, and they just said straight up, we're not interested. Not interested. We don't even want to look at them, let alone publish them. We won't even consider them." So the level of media complicity really in the suffering of the Palestinian people is shocking to behold, and I don't think it's ever been worse than it is today. But that doesn't mean we're going to be deterred. Public opinion is shifting, notwithstanding the moral complicity and the cowardice of the mainstream media. We see this all over the West. As I just mentioned, mainstream human rights organizations are being forced to admit the gravity of what is being done to the Palestinian people. We can't wait for the mainstream media to catch up. We will persist, but it is nonetheless true that they're doing nothing to help us, and we can't rely upon them to assist in the struggle for justice.
Yeah, I know for the previous flotillas, the massacre in the Mavi Marmara, the media, of course, were kind of forced to cover that a bit, and also on the former NDP MP from Nanaimo, I'm just totally blanking on his name right now. Very good activist. Paul Manley. When his dad, Jim Manley, when Jim Manley was held in jail for like a week or something like that, but the Israelis finally, the Canadian media covered it, and actually with what Paul Manley got why the NDP wouldn't let Paul Manly run was because he criticized the NDP's unwillingness to raise a former MP being detained by Israel. So it takes.
I just want to say one thing about that, Eve. I'm sorry to interrupt, but you reminded me that this captain, the Swedish captain, who was arrested and interned in Israel in 2012, he was there when Jim Manley was apprehended. And he told me today, I interviewed him, and he said to me that he was being pinned down by Israeli soldiers at that moment, and he saw that they were about to tase Jim Manley. And he just happened to know that Jim Manley had a pacemaker. And he started screaming at the soldiers, "Don't tase that man, he has a pacemaker." And there happened to be an Israeli military doctor nearby who intervened and stopped them from doing it. I mean, that's how egregious it was. These facts were probably known to the NDP, and they basically threw their former MP under the bus. I mean, it's absolutely astonishing, the level of, political complicity in Canada and these crimes against humanity. Amazing.
And that comes to another topic that I want to just bring up with you before letting viewers ask any questions they want. Is that it just came public that the Canadian government put forward an advisory opinion to the International Court of Justice, which had been mandated by a UN resolution to look at the legality of how other states should respond to the Israeli occupation, the legality of it, and these kind of questions. And the Canadian government didn't just vote against the UN resolution to have this happen, but actually put in a submission saying you shouldn't do this. You shouldn't even provide an advisory opinion on the international law questions that the General Assembly has asked of the World Court, and said that basically the Palestinians need to sit down with the Israelis and hash it out, and basically, the family of a murder victim should have a conversation with the murderer to come to some sort of agreement on whether we should proceed with this matter. Just your opinion on this. I haven't seen if the NDP or Heather McPherson or others have. There's been pretty, Canadian Foreign Policy Institute and Just Peace Advocates put out action alert, and it's gotten wide circulation. But I haven't seen if anyone else the NDP has criticized this. But yeah, just your opinion on this egregious kind of question.
Yeah, so under Article 96 of the UN Charter, the General Assembly and the Security Council, each acting separately, they don't have to act together, can refer a question to the International Court of Justice for an advisory opinion. And that's what the General Assembly did. Finally, should have done this a long time ago, frankly. And they've been pressured, many countries, I'm sure, by the United States not to seek an advisory opinion from the ICJ, but they finally mustered the courage to do that. Now, it is true that even though Article 96 confers jurisdiction on the ICJ to issue an advisory opinion in a case like this, where it's requested to do so by either the General Assembly or the Security Council, it has the discretion to decline to exercise its jurisdiction if there are compelling reasons. And this has come from prior jurisprudence of the International Court of Justice. So Canada submits this joke of a submission, claiming that there are compelling reasons. It admits that the International Court of Justice has jurisdiction to do this, but it says there are compelling reasons for it to decline to exercise its jurisdiction. And it's in the summary is in paragraph 12 of its submission. And it says this: Canada believes that the compelling reasons present in this case are twofold. The first being the lack of consent to the jurisdiction of the court by an interested state to the dispute, of course, that being Israel. And the second being that the UN Security Council is the body with primary responsibility for the overarching issue, not the UN General Assembly. Well, let's deal with the first claim that Israel didn't consent. This is not a compelling reason. Why would Israel consent? Israel is the oppressor. Israel has been adjudged already by the International Court of Justice to be in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention by virtue of the settlements and the separation wall. It has a strong interest given the agenda of the Israeli government, to resist any kind of an advisory opinion from the ICJ. So why should the ICJ care in this particular case where it's already adjudged Israel to be in violation of the Fourth Geneva Convention about its lack of consent? And I would argue that the fact that it signed on to the UN Charter is implicit consent. You know, when it signed on to the UN Charter, it was signing on to Article 96. And Article 96 confers upon the General Assembly the jurisdiction to request, or the authority to request, the ICJ to render an advisory opinion. And then the second ground, let's talk about that for a second. The UN Security Council is the body with primary responsibility for the overarching issue. The UN Security Council has issued one resolution after another condemning Israel's violations of international law. And the last time it did that was in the dying days of the Obama administration, where one of the few times where Obama actually did something principled in international relations. And that particular resolution, which repeated what many prior resolutions had said, that Israel was in violation of international law by building these settlements and depriving the Palestinian people of a sovereign state, it actually called upon states to take action without specifying what the nature of that action should be to ensure Israel's compliance with international law. And so the UN Security Council has spoken. It's spoken many times. So what is Canada talking about? I mean, these people are delusional. And the last thing I want to say about this, Yves, is let's contrast this to Canada's position when the International Criminal Court, with lightning speed, indicted Vladimir Putin several months ago for alleged violations of international law relating to the transfer of Ukrainian children out of occupied territory into Russia. Okay, Canada supported that. It supported that even though the ICC had failed over the entire period of its existence to pursue war crimes allegations against Western war criminals in the most egregious of cases. It did absolutely nothing about the criminal invasion of Iraq. It did absolutely nothing about the United States government's admission that it had engaged in torture at CIA black sites. It did absolutely nothing about the ICJ's 2004 opinion that Israel was violating international law in the West Bank. It did absolutely nothing about Tony Blair's participation in the criminal war of aggression against Iraq. All of a sudden, Canada found an indictment that it liked because it was against an official enemy of the West and enthusiastically supported the indictment of the ICC. So when it suits the imperialistic hegemonic agenda of the United States government, the Canadian government is all too happy to cheerlead intervention by by international prosecutors, international adjudicative bodies to ensure the upholding of international law. But when it doesn't suit the hegemonic imperialistic agenda of the United States government, you know, these all of a sudden they come up with these completely bogus arguments in a desperate attempt to stop the ICJ from intervening. I think the ICJ will take jurisdiction of this case. I think the Canadian government knows that. And I think that the Canadian government is doing this purely because it is playing to an audience back in Canada. And it wants to be able to say when the next election rolls around and it's looking for funding from people who support Israel, that it did its very best to stop the ICJ from intervening. So please continue to support our political party, because at the end of the day, we don't give a damn about human rights. It's all about getting elected.
Yeah, I think I kind of feel bad for the global affairs bureaucrats that had to come up with the argument for their submission, because it's got to be a soul destroying exercise to come up with those kind of ridiculous kind of arguments. But so I'll open it up to questions and comments. I see Laura has got her hand up, and I will also make you a co-host, Laura. So if I miss people, please do help. But go ahead, Laura.
Okay, thanks, Dimitri. It's great to hear you. I'm just wondering, in light of the media silence about the flotillas, they get almost no coverage, well, essentially no coverage. I'm just wondering, like in the past, what have they done to try to muster up some coverage? I seem to be sometimes they may have had international celebrities on. I can't, maybe I'm dreaming that, I can't remember. But I just, you know, the fact that there's this blackout, I'm just wondering what we might do or what they might do to try to get a little bit more coverage.
Well, thank you for the question. Yeah, and I think we have Wendy Goldsmith on this call. and Wendy has been tirelessly involved in the organization of the Freedom Flotilla over the years, and herself participated in the Women's Boat to Gaza. And I know that she has given a lot of thought to this question, but my understanding is that the organizers of the Freedom Flotilla, and I invite her to chime in if she wants to add anything, have invited and encouraged people who are journalists, who are members of national parliaments, legislatures, human rights activists of international renown to participate, and many of them have over the years. So we talked about Jim Manley, who was a member of parliament. There have been many parliament. In fact, today I was on the vessel with a member of the Norwegian parliament, a lady by the name of Hege, who is an MP for the Red Party, which has 8 seats in Norway's parliament, and which supports the BDS movement. And also I was another person from the Red Party, who's the deputy leader of the Oslo faction of the Red Party, was on the boat. And there were people, when I participated in 2018, there was an actress from Spain, very well-respected actress, who was participating. So we've tried to bring in people, the organizers, and they've been quite successful in doing that, who have a profile. And they've tried to, involve the media directly. And I know Al Jazeera has sent a number of journalists over the years, and hopefully they'll participate next year. But at the end of the day, we're really, I think, dependent upon people of conscience to spread the news about what the flotilla is doing by any and all means available to them, including on social media. So I encourage anybody who's on this call, to do that. I put a report on my website about this already. I'm going to be putting other reports. I'm sending my reports to the Real News, and I understand they're going to publish some stuff about this. There are a lot of people out there who've been tweeting about it. So please help us to get the news out there. Because as I say, we can't rely, unfortunately, upon the mainstream media to assist us in that regard.
Okay, Yves, I'm not able to unmute. Oh, Joan. Okay, Joan, go forth. You're unmuted.
Okay. Oh, I just want to mention what happened years ago when NATO was before the International Court of Justice. This was in 1999, before the invasion of Iraq. And so what happened was all NATO countries stood there and refused to accept the jurisdiction of the International Court of Justice. And acting for Canada was Philippe Kirsch, who was the first president of the ICC. And I can remember he was giving a presentation later on at the peace conference. And I asked the question about, I did a little bit of interference, so not as badly, not as effectively as you've been doing, both of you. But I asked him if he would, what he would do at the International Court of Justice when Canada was brought before the ICC. Would he do the same thing? Would they do the same thing as with the ICJ? And he was supposed to appear later on in the afternoon, and he told the organizer they would refuse to appear if I was there. So, but what was even worse at this conference is the way the NGOs were acting. And there was one woman there who was very, very, very pro-Israel and also pro-war. And she was giving a press conference, and we had worked for days and days and days putting together every night a statement condemning the NATO bombing of Iraq. Oh no, sorry, I'm sorry. I should be saying of Kosovo. And so I went to the press conference, and this woman was asked. She was one of the leaders in the movement, and she was asked, "Did the conference come up with any condemnation of NATO?" And she said, "No." And we had worked. This was part of the process. We had a statement and everything, and she said, "No, there was nothing." And what ended up happening after that was that the U.S. used the fact that there was no statement from the peace conference to then say that the peace conference supported what NATO was doing. So it's
Thank
fun.
you, Joan. It's great to get that historical perspective, and things
But I'm
haven't
sorry I
changed much.
mixed up.
But
There's so many
Okay, that's
damn
okay.
wars, but I mixed up. It was Kosovo that time.
Okay, so we'll move on to Gregory now. If you have a question, Gregory, go forth.
Yes. First of all, again, I applaud your courage, Dimitri, in embarking on this. And just I have two very quick questions. First of all, I'm concerned for your safety and all of the participants in this mission. And I'm also curious, when do you feel, or when do you believe you guys will reach Gaza? As I go back to school in September, I want to highlight this with my students and make them very aware of it as well. Thank you.
Thank you for the words of support, Greg. I don't know if you heard at the beginning, I was explaining that this year there is some question. First of all, they've divided up the voyage into over 2 years. So the first segment concluded today in Oslo. The boat is going to be put in winter storage, and then it'll pick up next year. And apparently there's some debate within the organizational structure of the Freedom Flotilla about whether they're prepared to attempt to breach the blockade this next year, next summer, because of the extremity of the current Israeli government. And there's a fear that they will return to the use of lethal force, which they've already employed in the case of 2010. So I don't know whether they're actually going to attempt to breach the blockade next summer. But I know I spoke to some people who were waiting dockside when we landed today. And one in particular said to me, if we don't, then there's no point in this exercise. We must continue no matter what the risks. I personally share that view, but I also understand why people would be reluctant to attempt to breach the blockade in the current environment.
Okay, all right, we'll move on to Alan. Can you, I'm trying, Eve, I don't think I can unmute people.
Yeah, my question is, can you explain a bit, give some clarity to the what's happening with the BDS? Is it growing? Is it having a strong effect on Israel? Just like to hear your comments on that.
You know, I want to qualify my answer by saying that I haven't been paying careful attention to the BDS movement. I'm going to be very candid with you. Why I haven't done that. I don't think it's having an impact on the behavior of the Israeli government. There's none that I can see. As far as I can tell, the Israeli government has become increasingly extreme. Civil society, despite the fact that it's done tremendous work, and I don't want to discourage people from supporting the BDS movement. They should support the BDS movement. But I think at the end of the day, for us to really change the complexion of the situation, we are going to have to pressure our governments into stopping their support for the state of Israel. And the biggest prize of all, the thing that would make the greatest difference of all, in my opinion, is to force the United States government to stop sending $3.8 billion of military aid a year to Israel. Israel is a very small country. Its behavior has aroused a tremendous amount of animosity in the region in which it is situated. And the only reason it gets away with it is because of that $3.8 billion a year in military aid and the implicit guarantee of the United States government that it would intervene to prevent a military defeat of Israel if it deemed it necessary to do so. So I think the greatest benefit, the greatest contribution that we can make to justice for the Palestinian people is to pressure its principal sponsor, the United States government, into changing dramatically its policies with respect to support for Israel. And there's a lot of good work being done in that regard, both inside and outside the United States. And you're starting to see some movement within the Democratic Party. You have people like Rashida Tlaib saying openly that Israel is an apartheid state. You know, a Democratic congressperson. You know, Ilhan Omar has made extraordinarily principled public statements in defense of the Palestinian people. And there are others. Betty McCollum supports, you know, another Democratic congressperson supports the defense for Palestinian children. So that's, to me, where the greatest promise lies. But as I say, we should continue to support the BDS movement, even though practically speaking, it doesn't seem to have had up until this point in time a dramatic impact on the behavior of the Israeli government.
I would just add quickly, I think where the BDS movement has been among its more successful is with regards to the sort of cultural boycott, and specifically around musicians and not playing in Israel, and that I think it's sort of like it forces Israelis at some level to recognize that there is the Palestinian question. They would want it to just all disappear and life goes on. And so, it's so at some level kind of ridiculous, but, some well-known international musician won't play, and therefore it forces Israelis to think about how there's still this, global civil society is challenging. So I think that's where it's successful. I think that, there's Canada's complicity with Palestinian dispossession is so great that sometimes the boycott stuff is a little bit removed from the actual reality of Canadian politics, right? We have these registered charities in this country that are raising funds for the Israeli military right now in contravention of Canada Revenue Agency rules, right? And this is being subsidized. These are donations being subsidized by the Canadian taxpayer that right now, not like in changing legislation, but right now violate Canada Revenue Agency rules. And some of these groups actually raise large amounts of money. So the depth of Canada's complicity in Palestinian dispossession, to me, is a little bit, it's different. I mean, Canada was complicit with apartheid South Africa, but we're talking about a degree of complicity that's much greater. And so if we ever got anywhere close to what the Mulroney government brought in, which was partial sanctions, that would force Israel's hand. Whether it would be full justice for the Palestinians, no, of course not, but would have a huge impact on Israeli politics and specifically strengthening the hand of Palestinians to get some degree of justice. So
we have 3 more questions. We're over time. I just wanted to check with the two of you. Can we take these 3 questions? Dimitri, it's late where you are. Yeah, are you okay? Okay, sure. Yves, okay. All right, okay, Karine, can you go ahead, please?
I have a question for Yves Engler. I'm wondering why you think that the police in Hong Kong are repressive, and why you think that Gaddafi stole money from Libya. I heard he lived in a palace, so maybe that's possible. I'm wondering if you can explain.
Well, I think that when I say the police, I sort of assume police everywhere are repressive. That the bar to me is completely for the police themselves to show that they're not repressive. That basically everywhere in the world is my sort of feeling on that matter. Now, with regards to Hong Kong, I think I mentioned in the last session or previous session, during the big protests a few years ago, they didn't kill anyone. The protesters actually did kill one person, and they set someone on fire, I think injuring them pretty seriously. My understanding is the Hong Kong police did hurt fairly, many people. And I compared that to the 2012 Quebec student strike in where the SPVM and the Sûreté de Québec, I believe they knocked out at least 3 people's eyes. It might be a bit higher, maybe 4 or 5 people's eyes. And from my understanding, there was no police officer that was hurt in any substantive way during the months of protests. So I haven't done a deep dive into the Hong Kong police, and I have somewhat done a deep dive into Montreal police that I at a personal level. So you can make an argument. It seems to me you can make an argument that the Montreal and Quebec police in 2012 were as or more repressive than what the Hong Kong police did in 2019. But yeah, that's one. And then with regards to Gaddafi, I think that the evidence about like his sons having condos and then obviously all the stuff that happened with SNC-Lavalin and his I think eldest son, forgetting his first name, Saif, I think it's pretty clear that there was some corrupt dealings going on between SNC-Lavalin and they were getting contracts in exchange for helping, giving stuff and party. And there were always stories about the parties and the hotels in Montreal and all this stuff that was being SNC-Lavalin. So I think that's pretty clear. I am skeptical of this report that Gaddafi himself had billions of dollars in Canada. I don't think that is correct. I think that's an exaggeration, and that's being motivated politically. But I would be very surprised if there weren't substantive levels of corruption from within the Gaddafi family.
Okay, Nadia, can you go forward?
Yes, hello. Thank you, first of all, Dimitri and Yves, and I really admire your courage. I'm just wondering, why is it that the NDP and the Green Party are not supporting the Palestinians? Why?
Well, I'll let Yves respond about the NDP. I got nothing good to say about the NDP, but at least don't have a lot of good things to say about the Green Party nowadays, to be perfectly blunt about it. But at least the NDP, the Green Party, has a policy which calls for the use of boycott, divestment, and sanctions to bring an end to the oppression of the Palestinian people. And Elizabeth May, although she kind of seems to be all over the map on this issue, she did say at a press conference after having visited the West Bank that Israel was committing the crime of apartheid, and that what Palestinians endure in the West Bank is much worse than apartheid in South Africa. So she said that publicly in the press conference, and has from time to time been quite critical of the Israeli government. And at the end of the day, what we need to do is to have more politicians calling for sanctions. And I just want to say, just as an aside, because we're on the subject of what political parties are doing, I noticed in the chat that a couple of people expressed skepticism about the two congresspersons that I mentioned, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. And I understand why you have that skepticism. I would just point out to you that there is another candidate out there by the name of Dr. Cornel West, who is a true champion of the Palestinian people. I am absolutely confident that he is not going to disappoint us if he happens to ever gain political power. And in fact, it's for that reason that I and Radhika Desai and Alan Freeman, two Canadian academics, are working on his campaign. And one of the things we're working on right now is helping him formulate a foreign policy. So there's a candidate, I think, who could really move the dial on Palestinian issues in the United States. And if you can support him even as Canadian citizens in some way with your time and energy, please do that.
Yves, do you want to address?
Yeah, just a quick note on the NDP. I mean, the NDP has a long history of being, very anti-Palestinian, pro-Zionist. That's broken up a little bit in recent years. It's taken remarkable amounts of internal organizing and activist energy to force the party to pass that resolution back in 2021. That's a modest but significant step forward in terms of calling for sanctions on products from the West Bank and ending arms sales to Israel. So the NDP has been very anti-Palestinian history. That's that deserves a whole talk in and of itself. And where all that comes from, but they have made modest strides in a positive direction, and I think you can debate one way or another about whether, for those who have spent their time kind of organizing on the issue within the NDP, but I think that there has been some progress that should be recognized. And Heather McPherson, who I really don't like her position, particularly on the NATO proxy war, on China, on a whole bunch of issues, she has been willing to call on the government to, why do they claim that Israel's not an apartheid state? And she uses Amnesty and Human Rights Watch as a sort of protective cover to raise that question. And that's useful within the confines of current day Canadian political culture. So there's some positive echoes within the NDP on the question.
Okay. Can you unmute Gassan, or can you unmute him, Yves? Oh, go ahead, Gassan.
Yeah. First of all, I'm immigrant from Syria, and I really appreciate Dimitri courage and integrity to put his effort in and put his life in risk to help Palestinian. And I want to say that the war crime that Israel committing is not only against Palestine, is as well against Syria. And they use a stupid excuse of Assad as a dictator to bomb Syria every second day, like the Americans do. And I always hear that, Assad is killing his own people, which I am not big fan of Assad in any way, but Americans dropped in 2014 one bomb every 8 minutes over Syria. Trump carpet bombed Raqqa, is a city in Syria, which they don't mention that, but they say regardless of what we think about Assad, but the West always using this excuse to bomb and kill with no not being accountable. Now I want to say that to be honest, I don't believe from the West we have any power. People have no power at all to change anything in government, anything, zero. Especially after I saw how Bernie Sanders and Alexander Cortez, of what's called progressive, bent over to the establishment there. But I'm seeing that. I want to see what your opinion about that. We are seeing in a global context, in the global world, we see the world is changing, and the new world order is becoming real. And this war of Ukrainian war, regardless of what you think about Putin and what we think about Russian, what is doing is escalating this. We see now the American imperialism is in non-stopping decline, and we see it every day in economy. We are going in the West deeper and deeper into economic trouble and social trouble and social hole that we don't see, but we see China and India and the BRICS are rising, and they are going to change the world. They are, in effect, China is now where the world decision is made, and now China is talking about a peace plan between Israel and the Arab countries. So do you have any idea what could happen of this new world order, how Israel will be part of it?
I think that's an excellent question. Let me say without any hesitation that we are watching truly momentous events today. I see American power collapsing everywhere. It's collapsing in Ukraine. It's collapsing in Central Africa. This attempt to, cobble together an army of West African nations to restore to power somebody who is favored by the West in Niger seems to be going nowhere. It's floundering. You mentioned the BRICS. The de-dollarization movement is accelerating. I think today there was news that India, for the very first time, purchased a large supply of oil with Indian rupees without US dollars. I think that the U.S. weapons industry has been completely discredited by the poor performance of these so-called wonder weapons on the battlefield in Ukraine. And we are clearly heading towards a multipolar world. And I think that that's a good thing. Doesn't mean that I believe, that the governments, that any or all of those governments are ideal governments. But if the United States is finally forced to deal with other states in a cooperative manner and is deprived of the ability to impose its will upon other states, then that will be a tremendously positive change in the situation. And I think this is particularly difficult for Israel right now because Israel's power, as I indicated earlier in my comments, depends entirely upon American sponsorship. Without the support of the United States government and the ability of the United States government to deliver the necessary degree of support, Israel's project of domination of the Palestinian people, violating the sovereignty of Syria, violating the sovereignty of Lebanon and other states with complete impunity is over. It's completely over. And this, and the recent intervention of China to mediate détente between Iran and Saudi Arabia, I just found it absolutely astonishing. Who would have thought 5 years ago that the Saudis and the Iranians would be sitting across the table and dealing with each other in a respectful manner and shaking each other's hands and talking about working cooperatively together? I saw a report recently, I think it was in Consortium News, about the Abraham Accords falling apart. Morocco has delayed the implementation of a key aspect of those accords because of Israel's increasing disregard, a flagrant disregard for the well-being of the Palestinian people, including the attack on the Jenin refugee camp. Israel, I think, is in a real tough spot right now, and the internal the internal dissent and instability is exacerbating the problems for the Israeli government. I've said many times that Israel's apartheid regime is a house of cards, and that house of cards will collapse. And when it happens, it's going to happen with breathtaking speed, and we will all be taken aback by how quickly it happens. And we may be at that point right now because of these momentous changes that are happening geopolitically.
Probably a good note to end on. Is there something positive? So, Yves, thank you very much, Dimitri.
Yes, thanks, Dimitri, and thanks everyone for participating. And same place, same time next week. Have a good evening. Take care, everyone.
Thank you.